So you guys guessed it. I just came home from the beach because I'm quite sunburnt. Actually, it doesn't look too bad on camera here. Might be because of the lighting. By the way, if you hear the music, I don't know if my neighbor's having a party. I don't know what's happening. But I have been using sunscreen with SPF, right? That's what it's called, 100, like highest, because I take this shit seriously. You know, I take getting sunburn very seriously. I know it can significantly increase your chances of getting skin cancer. So I take it very seriously, but the SPF 100 was so gross. My clothes would get sticky. Like even, you know, I've been in the water all day, been out in the sun, sweat through it, took a shower, took another shower. It still would stick to my clothes like the same night and typically the day after, even when I'm sleeping and stuff. And also it layers on just so thick and oily. So I was like, no more SPF 100. So I switched to 50 or 70, and clearly it's not as powerful. I should have put on another layer. I didn't even spend the entire day at the beach. I was there for like 3 hours or so. But here we are, sunburnt and all. My face isn't too bad. It's really just the neck. Anyway, guys, you know when I put a video up on a day that's not a Wednesday, you know it's a spontaneous stream of conscious, like a video that was not planned. This video was not planned, but I've been thinking about this topic, as I'm sure some of you have as well. Maybe not. I've been thinking about this the past week, probably every day, and every time I think about it, I get angry. Like I really get riled up. And today, I went to the beach. You guys know this. When I have my coffee and I go to the beach, I get very wired, and I walk on the beach for miles, and I think all these things. I think about all these things, which I should probably stop doing. You know, I am a cerebral thinker. I'm always in my head. But I should maybe work on that, because I feel like then they tell me I have resting bitch face. You know, like I'm that person who's just walking down the street like, but it's because half the time I'm deep in thought thinking about something. But I'm sure I probably like lose out on, you know, opportunities, meeting people, because I don't look friendly, like I'm in my own universe. So I should probably, whatever, that's the whole other thing. But I've been thinking about this, and it doesn't really directly relate to being gay. And you guys know this channel is all about gay issues, LGBT issues. But I wanted to talk about it because I had my walk on the beach and I was like, we have to talk about this. And I will relate it back. I always find a way to relate it back to being gay. But first, let's discuss. So for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I don't know, can you guys hear that? It's very loud. These neighbors, I tell you, quarantine, you keep them in quarantine and they forget that everybody else is home too, trying to have a peaceful day at home. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to give you the Clip Notes version. So DeSean Jackson is a football player. Nick Cannon is, we'll call him an entertainer, mostly an actor, but he's done music. He's been a DJ. He has been a host of a bunch of shows, comedian. We'll call him an entertainer, okay? Hollywood guy. So they both, coincidentally, in the past week or so, made some comments on their social media that got a lot of backlash and was essentially deemed anti-Semitic, and reasonably so. And I want to talk about it. Specifically, I want to focus on the nuances of what they said, because I think on the surface, people were very pissed by what they said and people were outraged, as they should be. But I want to talk about like the second leap beyond that, what it really entails. And this is what I was thinking on the beach today, like beyond the surface, when you really think about it, what it represents and like the irony of their thinking. Okay. So first off, let me give you the Clip Notes version. So DeSean Jackson on, I think, Instagram or Twitter, he posted a quote from Hitler. By the way, this is wrongly attributed to Hitler, but this is like something that I guess pro-Nazi people will do, or pro-Hitler people will do, that they will quote Hitler to do this, to serve their point. He quoted Hitler. It literally started, Hitler said, which I'm like, how does somebody have the audacity to like quote Hitler and to put that first and make it sound like it must be credible because Hitler said it. The quote that he put up on his social media said, Hitler said that essentially black people are the real children of Israel. in quotes, children of Israel. That's not my, I don't speak that way, children of Israel. And that essentially like Jews know this, and so they're doing everything they can in America and have done everything they can to create a power dynamic where they're in charge and they convince white people to keep black people subservient so that the black people don't know that they're the real the ones to inherit the kingdom of Israel or whatever. Strikingly, Nick Cannon made very similar comments. No, by coincidence, like not on purpose, or he wasn't trying to piggyback. They just happened to be spouting the same sort of nonsensical rhetoric the same exact week. Nick Cannon on his podcast was basically saying the same thing, that black people are the real Hebrews and that it's really their birthright, I guess, to inherit Israel. And that he literally used the word birthright, and that he also said a lot of other things. To me, that was the tip of the iceberg, but then he said a lot of other things like that black people have more melanin, and that that makes them genetically superior to white people, and that therefore white people, out of their insecurity and inferiority, for that reason chose to enslave black people and create this power dynamic because they're insecure about their whiteness, all this stuff. And he was trying to use like history and science to back that up. I think this is why I was so riled up this whole week thinking about this. Every time I would think about it, I would get angry. And I think it's because there's something, it's bad enough to be ignorant, but when you try to use facts in a non-factual way, like when you speak with historical inaccuracy to make a point, there's just something about that to me that feels very manipulative and also just very inappropriate and irresponsible. The reality is, if you look at the history, all these comments that I just quoted of theirs, it's all completely inaccurate. Like, they were, in saying these things, both DeSean Jackson and Nick Cannon were erasing the history of Jewish people. By the way, I'm not Jewish. I have no like dog in this fight, so to speak, but like that is Jewish history. Like you can't reappropriate somebody's history, erase their history and make it yours. That's number one. Number two, if you really look at the science, that's not what the science says. If there was a genetically superior race, first off, that in itself, the concept that somebody would want to seek a genetically superior race is disturbing. Like for us in 2020 to be using the rhetoric of there's a genetically superior race is disturbing. But if there really was, that would be the only race alive, because that's the history of human evolution. Like, we are the descendants of the Homo sapiens. If we're really going to get scientific with it, the Homo sapiens who survived, right? And who, through natural selection of evolution, beat out the other comparable species, right? So like the Neanderthals is the common example used. No descendants of Neanderthals are here today. They are extinct because the Homo sapiens were the genetically superior species or race, in a sense, of the human-like creatures that were on the planet. So by that same logic, if there really was a genetically superior race, they probably would be the only race alive today. And the reality is, again, if you look at the science, there are scientific advantages to being black, let's say, somewhere like, the desert in Africa, in the wilderness in Africa, in the same way that there's genetic advantages to being white in a place like Sweden. You can do the research on it. I don't want to go off on a total tangent, but all this has to do with sunlight and vitamin D intake. So there's a reason why human evolution has evolved the way that it has. There's a science to it. So to try to reappropriate that science to back up these like tropes that are completely inaccurate and offensive is just like so disturbing, and again, so irresponsible. First disturbing part is the anti-Semitic stuff, the anti-Jewish rhetoric, right? No matter what you think about any religion or any group of people or Israel as a state, versus like, Israel-Palestine conflict, no matter what you think about any of this, any rhetoric that is trying to bring a group down collectively, that is offensive and unnecessary. Second thing is to try to erase anybody's history and reappropriate it is also offensive and unnecessary, and don't do it. Now I want to talk about the nuance, though, of why people like Nick Cannon and DeSean Jackson say stuff like this. What I find really ironic, I don't think these two guys are evil. I don't think these two guys, well, I hope that behind closed doors they're not associating themselves with this kind of hatred-based or bigoted mentality. I think these are two men who are very, not even just uneducated. The only thing worse than being uneducated is being miseducated. And I think that's another thing that killed me when I was watching Nick Cannon talk about this on his podcast. And he took it down, by the way, now because he got all this backlash. But if you research it, I'm sure you can find clips elsewhere, people reposting. He was speaking with such confidence that all this is just facts. It's all common sense when it is not. The only thing worse than being uninformed is being misinformed and spreading that irresponsibly to millions of followers, including young kids who look up to these guys, right? But I don't think these two guys are evil. I really don't even think that they had negative intentions, but sometimes the message is more important than the intent, and sometimes the intent is more important than the message. But in this case, the message was loud and it was really ignorant, and I think that what they were trying to do was show other Black people who listen to them we are a great people. We're we're even the superior people. We are the children of Israel. We're the real Hebrews. I think what they were trying to do, and DeSean Jackson said this in his apology, actually, and Nick Cannon kind of said it in his apology, but DeSean Jackson literally said, I was trying to uplift my community, Black America. I think they were both trying to do that, just in a really distasteful way. But what I find fascinating is that the first point of irony is that both of them felt like to celebrate Blackness, what they had to do was celebrate non-Blackness and reappropriate it as Blackness, right? So the children of Israel, the Hebrews, the Semites, to use Nick Cannon's verbiage. And it doesn't just stop there. We've seen this before where people will say Jesus was black, or the Egyptians. The other day I just read a comment on YouTube in relation to all this. A guy was saying, the deeper they dig, the darker they find that the Egyptians get. This person was trying to claim that ancient Egyptians are black, that the roots of Black Americans come from Egypt. This is scientifically inaccurate and it's historically inaccurate. But again, the nuance in there is how come to be proud of or to celebrate Blackness, one would feel the need to celebrate another culture and reappropriate its history to sound like it's the same, that it's the same lineage. It's completely false. To celebrate Blackness, all you have to do is celebrate Blackness. Celebrate the roots of West Africa, where the vast majority of slaves came from. We know this. This is a part of history. Or, because I know Black people who are don't call me African American. I have no connection to Africa. I know my ancestors come from there, but I am a Black American. I don't use these politically correct terms of African American. I am a Black American, right? Fair enough. You can celebrate modern American history, modern American culture, and that's the whole thing. If somebody like Nick Cannon, right, who has this podcast, he could be using that platform to celebrate Blackness by bringing Black cinema film, Black film critics to talk about historic Black movies every week and celebrate Black culture through that, or every week have a Black artist come through and talk about like somebody who's had a huge legacy, like a Stevie Wonder or Shaka Khan. There are people throughout various decades to talk to and to listen to what they've accomplished. That would be celebrating Black culture and uplifting Black voices. The second point of irony is that both of these men felt the need to uplift Black America while simultaneously both being monitored, managed and operating under the umbrella of old white men. I mean, Nick Cannon has been on Nickelodeon. He's been associated with Viacom since I was a kid. Like, I remember seeing him as a teenager on Nickelodeon. So he's been with them for such a long time, and he talked about this after they let him go as a result of all this. He was like, I've been in the Viacom family, to use his words, for over 20 years. And just like that, they threw me out, and I have no ownership over the shows that I created for them. Like, they exploited me. Basically, after they fired him, he tried to throw them under the bus. And although on a personal level, like, I empathize with the fact that, wow, he's been with them for that long. He's probably been with them longer than some of the people who fired him. Like, how crazy is that? Some of the people who work at the top at Viacom probably haven't even been there as long as he has. But just like that, they tossed him out. And by the way, I believe rightfully so. Like, although I can empathize with that feeling that he must feel betrayed, they still did what they had to do. Like, corporations have corporate interests and they don't want to be associated with this. And apparently they asked him to, like, apologize and take it back, and he refused, allegedly. So then they were like, well, then we have to fire him and make a public statement. So they made an ass out of him. Well, he made an ass out of himself, and they were like, here he goes. Like, he made an ass out of himself. But the irony is not lost on me that how he feels, or how he must feel, feeling this betrayal, it seems reminiscent to me of how a lot of slaves must have felt when they felt connected to family because they grew up in it. They helped raise the white kids of the slave owners, and then those kids grow up and suddenly the dynamic changes, and now they own the plantation and they still see you as a slave even though you helped raise them. Or slaves that, you know, lived on a plantation for decades and suddenly they get sold into to another plantation. DeSean Jackson works for the NFL, which to me is the closest analogy, the closest parallel we have in modern America to slavery. Men are literally physically and athletically trained to go run around on fields for the entertainment of white people and for the profit of old white men. The irony is not lost on me, and it shouldn't be lost on anybody else, that both of them were trying or thought they were uplifting Black America while simultaneously being an image of the remnants of slavery in our society today. And in DeSean Jackson's case, both of their cases, their apologies were not, to me, didn't feel genuine, and it felt to me like somebody who got cornered and is like, oh, well, I got this backlash. They're telling me I need to apologize, so I guess I'll apologize. But they both apologized in a way where I felt like they didn't fundamentally get the significance of their words, and that words have power, and that they use their words irresponsibly. And both of their apologies, in my mind, were very childlike. Again, like when a child apologizes because they're being told to apologize. For example, DeSean Jackson said something really odd in his apology. He said, I apologize on behalf of myself. Well, if you're apologizing, we already know you're apologizing. Like, to say on behalf of myself, to me, felt like he was removing accountability by distancing himself. Because to speak, in third person that way, it's like you're disconnecting yourself from the issue, right? Maybe I'm thinking too much into it. Maybe he's just not very bright. But either way, to me, their response, both with the words that they used, right, throughout all this, and then their response to it, showed me that neither guy is very educated. And so again, I'm noticing like the irony that in that sense, I feel like both of them were valued at a young age for what they could bring to the table for like old white men's profit, as opposed to, I think that's rain outside if you hear that, as opposed to like growing up receiving a proper education. The irony is not lost on me, again, that DeSean Jackson basically traded his schooling to be athletically trained for the profit of old white men. Let that sink in. So as a gay person, to circle it back, I'm looking at this thinking like, do I only notice these nuances because I'm gay? And also, I come from a mixed background. I'm an immigrant. So I think like, in a sense, that makes me a triple outsider. Like I've grown up always looking in from the outside and observing people and adapting to my surroundings and who I'm around. And I wonder, like, do I have that sense of nuance only because of that? Like, I think about this all the time. If I were a straight white man, would I still see the things that I see? Where some people see black and white, would I still see, as I do now, like the shades of gray in between? I don't know. You know, maybe that in itself is a privilege that I have, and that those of you guys who already think about this or have already considered these points and these nuances, like, is that a part of it? But then I think these two guys are both black men, and they apparently don't see any of this, even though they are part of a minority group, right? So they're supposed to have that outsider sort of looking in and seeing the dynamics that are taking place. Regardless, I think it's really easy to vilify people like this, DeSean Jackson and Nick Cannon, people who think the way that they think. But today when I came home from the beach, I really saw it as like, I pity these guys, because there's that saying, if you know better, you do better. And I think they, based on their responses to everything happening, like their apologies, I think that they fundamentally don't get it. And it's almost like they don't have the capacity to get it. I think they're like intellectually limited in the way that they see this. And honestly, the older I get, the more news I consume, the more celebrity culture I consume, the more fake wokeness that I see and that I perceive. I'm like, wow, a lot of people in the world who are adults doing just fine, career-wise, professionally, financially, whatever, are intellectually limited. Like, their capacity to understand the scope of what's happening. Again, it's like where I see gray, they just see black and white. And it's stunning to me. As always, curious what you guys think. Let me know in the comments.